So good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to be in a conversation with Danielle. Thank you for agreeing to do it. We're very excited for this conversation. There will be about a half an hour of Q&A towards the end, and that's your chance to ask questions of any sort from what you've heard tonight or things that interest you. Before we begin, I want to say just this: it's Juneteenth. And you probably know that that's a national holiday now, and it commemorates the liberation of African American enslaved people at the end of the Civil War. June 19th, 1865, it really began in Galveston in Texas and has now been adopted nationwide. And it reminds us of subjected peoples in the United States. This came fully 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and I think it's important that this conversation occur in the context of that. How many of you are from North Dakota? So we share many things. We are both North Dakotans. In fact, we both have residency in Bismarck, North Dakota. I grew up in Dickinson. You grew up in Bismarck. I think you left when you were about 12.
I was in high school,
Right.
yeah, yep.
But you are a Lakota woman and an artist and an author, and I do encourage everyone to buy this book. It's a great introduction to the history of being Native American in the United States from 1492 until today. You're also an activist, and so we have so many things that we can talk about. I thought the best way to go about this would be to take passages from your book, and I've put them in our slides so that you are speaking for yourself, from yourself.
Sure.
I think that's the best procedure here. I just want to say this much more. When Columbus bumped into the New World in 1492, there were several tens of millions of indigenous people in North America. In 1900, there were fewer than 200,000 Native Americans in what's now the United States. An extraordinary loss, not just to Native Americans, but to the rich diversity of this country and to our understanding of this place. It's such a chilling statistic. When Columbus bumped into the New World, 100% of North America was sovereign to Native people, some 500 or more. By the 1920s, about 5% of the landform in North America was still sovereign in some respect to Native people. So I think that's a really important starting place here. And I see that you're wearing this t-shirt, Danielle, and I can't read all of it, but it begins with land back. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, starts off with land back, water back, medicine, basically everything back. We just want it all back.
But what do you, I mean, there is a land back movement. Explain that.
So land back started, it's sort of kind of an activism type of statement, literally, wanting land back. But before I say that, I want to properly be Native. I want to be an Indian girl and introduce myself in my language. So I'm going to start off with that. Húŋkpapÿa Lakļóta, Danielle SeeWalker Matyapi, Húŋkpapÿa Lakļóta, na Chati Shakawini Mahata, Denver, Colorado, Awati. It's important for me to always introduce myself to people in my language, a language that almost went extinct and that is on the verge of extinction, as many Native languages are today. And I just want to also acknowledge the Native people that came tonight to be here, including our Ute relatives we're sitting in their sacred lands, where many of you work, play, live, and reside. And so a special shout out to my Ute friends and sisters. But yeah, so land back, that kind of goes hand in hand. So there's been a lot of stolen lands, a lot of stolen culture, stolen languages, a lot of things ripped from our people. And I want to say Native American is not a homogenized group of people. We are currently 574 maybe different federally recognized tribes, each with our own language, our own traditions, cultures, food, ceremony. I sort of like to equate it, which I did mention in my book, Europeans, we talk about Europeans, but Europe is divided into different cultures, different languages, different communities, different sovereign nations in a way. So same thing as Native American people.
So, you heard the land acknowledgement statement. That's now widespread in the United States. And it's a good first step of acknowledgement, but I was talking with a Paiute man not so long ago and talking about a struggle in North Dakota for a land acknowledgement statement.
Yeah.
And he said, so you're going to give us the land back too? In other words, the statement is great,
Yeah.
but what comes next?
That's
and
right.
so land back is part of
Yeah.
what comes next.
And it's really, I mean, people are, I get a lot of, well, how can we actually give you your land back? Well, there's ways, but it's more than, it's really about like, what actions are you taking to hold space for Native Indigenous people? What are you doing to create opportunities? There's more action that can be taken than just simply checking a box off and reading a land acknowledgement. And I will say the land acknowledgement that was read today, I'm not a big fan of them, but that one was really...
It's beautiful.
I would disagree.
No, okay, I'm sorry. What did you think?
It was about promoting what they're doing instead of promoting the stolen land and the people that reside here.
Right.
So again, it was self-centering to the organization that was reading it.
All right, my apology. So there is land back activity,
Yeah.
around the margins. For example, take the Black Hills.
Yeah.
Black Hills were never ceded by the Lakota and the Cheyenne to the United
Right.
States. They were literally stolen.
Yeah.
In 1980, the U.S. federal court system said that it was a theft and that what they called then the Sioux were entitled to that land. But the Lakota refused a monetary settlement and said, no, we want the land back. And many non-natives say, well, wait a minute, how would that even work? But the vast majority of the Black Hills are federally owned lands. They're not private property. And so that would be possible to deed back whole segments of the Black Hills and also to go into co-management relationships on the other parts.
Yeah, absolutely. How many of you guys know that the Black Hills, where Mount Rushmore and all of that is actually Lakota land that was stolen? And because we wouldn't sell it, the government decided to carve 4 faces into it as sort of marking their territory. Which is sort of, a very big dagger to our spirit. It's our creation story happens in those lands. And currently, I was just having a conversation with an elder over the weekend that there's over $7 billion in trust right now that the government is wanting to give my community, my people. We could all be instant millionaires, but we refuse to take that money because that land is not for sale. It was never for sale. It was stolen. And so we will never take that money.
And that struggle will continue for a long time. So, all right, so here's an image of you. This is your book.
Yeah.
When did you finish it?
I wrote this in 2020. We all seem to have, I had a lot of time on my hands kind of to do things that I wanted to do. We were all kind of cooped up in our house, and it was always on my plate to write a quick, easy read book. I'm a mother of 2 sons. At the time, both were middle schoolers, and I was always that mom marching into the schools to be like, all right, my kid told me you're teaching this, and I don't understand why. Can we have a conversation about maybe teaching something more accurate? And so I was always in the schools. To this day, I still give a lot of talks in public schools and come and teach about Native Americans. I feel like a lot of our curriculum is based on Natives as we are in the past. We're not teaching children that we still exist today. We're thriving, successful community members that live amongst everybody in our communities. And I think it's important to teach about contemporary Native American people, culture, and communities. And so that really prompted me to want to write this book. I get a lot of questions about things like, what is a reservation? Or what was the activism in the 1960s I heard about, that took over Alcatraz? Or, I get a lot of these one-off questions, but repeatedly from people that are really curious. And so this book is a very simple, easy to read that covers a lot of different topics. And I designed it, I worked with somebody to help me design it to be middle school reading level, because I was being self-serving at the time, wanted my middle schoolers to be able to share this with their classmates. But it's really a great way to prompt your own, read through it and then go and dig a little deeper and do your own research.
So when you go to the school and say you're not teaching this story accurately, how do the teachers respond?
Well, I'll give a quick story. So I lived in South Carolina for a very brief moment. I realized that was not the type of community I wanted to raise my kids in. My older son at the time was in 3rd grade, and he came home with this book, and it was a novel that they had to read. Can't recall the name of it, but it basically was a relationship between a white boy who had befriended a Native American boy. And throughout the book, they would have these dialogues with one another in the book, and the Native boy spoke broken English, was kind of referred to as almost inhumane. And it really made my son feel like, why are they portraying the native as like not smart or not equivalent to this white boy in this book? So I went to the school, of course, I read it that night, cover to cover, went to the school the next day to talk to them about it, and they said, well, we're not going to take the book out, your son can just read something different from the rest of the class. And to me, that wasn't good enough, and that was a pivotal moment for me. I was like, I can't, I'm never going to give up, I'm going to continue to be in the classrooms, but I also don't want to raise my kids in a school system in that community. Yeah, but I say all that to say is that that really was the sticking point for me to keep going. And today I'm actually working with Denver Public Schools to help write curriculum and create curriculum, intro to ethnic studies, Turtle Island, which will be in middle and high school level. So I'm really excited about that.
More curriculum coming.
Yeah.
And this book is for sale here out in the lobby. So when I read your book, one of the first things I saw was this photograph.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely haunting photograph. Tell us what's happening here.
So this is a photograph of a boarding school. How many of you all know about the boarding schools? Or I don't even like to consider them schools because they really weren't schools. I don't know any other school that has graveyards of children on the property. They were more like assimilation camps. So children, at the turn of the century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a big uprising of boarding schools being placed all over the country. Carlisle Indian School was the very first school in Pennsylvania, and children were taken from their families without consent, oftentimes, and placed in these boarding schools from basically kindergarten age all the way through high school. And they were taught things like how to cook, how to paint, how to do carpentry. It was basically skills. And the whole concept was kill the Indian but save the man. They realized at this point they couldn't get rid of natives like they wanted to. So they figured, well, we may as well make them useful. So they stole the children, completely ripped culture away from them. They cut their hair, they punished them for speaking languages, weren't able to practice their culture or their own ceremonies, see their families, etc. And this photo speaks volumes to me because it was a school in South Dakota that was put up, and thankfully the families were nearby where they could still be close enough to their children. They were devastated, their kids were taken from them, so they set camp up right outside the school. That wasn't always the case. A lot of these kids were taken from the Dakotas or small reservation areas in the Midwest and shipped to Pennsylvania or Virginia, and their families couldn't be near them. But these families were able to be as close to their kids as they could.
And you mentioned Richard Pratt, so he was the founder of the Carlisle Indian School, an industrial school to teach sewing and carpentry and wagoneering and so on. But his actual mission statement was kill the Indian, save the man.
Yep.
We can only coexist here if we de-Indianize the native peoples and make them like us.
Yeah.
And so you were punished for speaking your language. You were punished for praying to your own sacred beings and so on.
Yeah.
No contact with home. So many children never came back, and if you walk through the cemetery at the Carlisle Indian School, it's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
A young woman at 8 died of a broken heart. That kind of story again and again and again.
Yeah, a lot of the graves are unmarked. They don't even give them the respect of putting their name on the grave.
And there still are native boarding schools, but most of their missions are quite different now.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know a Native American that exists today that doesn't have some sort of tie to the boarding schools. I mean, they were going all the way up until recently. My grandmother and my father were boarding school survivors. My grandmother, in fact, was orphaned in a boarding school, and so, her generation were severely, severely traumatized by boarding schools. Specifically, they were operated and ran by Catholic churches. And so, I remember asking her, I would hear her, I would peek around the kitchen and see her talking in Lakota with her friends. And I remember asking her one time, Grandma, why don't you talk that language to me? And she would say, you don't need to know that, it's not going to do you any good. And she would never speak about her boarding school experience. I only knew one story, but I don't even want to share it because it's really, really devastating and traumatic. But it was very traumatizing and a turn and a shift to our culture. Boarding school is a root of many of the issues that we continue to face today. So
based on what happened in South Africa, Canada has adopted reconciliation commissions in which people who suffered under these systems are able to confront the people that demonized them or abused them. There was sexual abuse, physical violence, and that's turned out to be quite a successful program. And I know that Deb Haaland, the Native Secretary of the Interior, is trying carefully to do some of that here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first step is to recognize and admit that this happened in this country, and our government hasn't formally done that yet. Here in Colorado, we have a boarding school legislation that's going on, and a lot of research that's been going on, because we do have boarding schools here in Colorado. And so we're doing a lot of research to uncover some of that here.
So Danielle, how important is it that the Secretary of the Interior of the United States is now a Native woman?
It's freaking amazing. I mean, I can't even begin to say, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. If my grandmother or father were still alive, they for sure would be they're probably rolling around in the spirit world right now, dancing, because I don't know that we'd ever thought we would see that. So it's amazing.
And she's going to make a difference in national park policy, national monuments, monuments.
This position she's in is the perfect position for a Native person to be in, aside from president.
And is building a foundation for the future of the BIA and so on.
For sure, yeah. Yep.
So it's a revolution.
It really is, yeah.
And I think we should say that President Joseph Biden is the one who appointed her, that's something that he felt very strongly about.
Yeah.
All right. So this photograph, I think, is a great start in your book, but it really is chilling. And I'm sure that the school authorities were not that glad that the families pitched camp outside.
Right.
Because they wanted the young people not to have any contact. All right, so this is from an interview that you conducted. Do you want to read it?
Sure. So this was, I've been working on a long-term project for over a decade called the Red Road Project, and I interview a lot of Native people from all over, whether it's urban areas to reservations and everywhere in between, because I'm really trying to highlight what it means to be Native in the 21st century. We don't often see that a lot. So this is a medicine man, my family's medicine man. Actually, I sat down with James, shot with 2 arrows, and this is what he told me. He said, "What did we do so wrong that they would wipe us out? Strip of us our land, force us onto reservations, take our language and clothing, make our children go into boarding schools, and punish them for crying for their mothers. We cared for this land, and now look at it. Look at us, we are dying. We are a people of millions, and now some tribes have a few left, if any. Some have died out altogether. We're losing our languages. Many of our lives have succumbed to alcohol. Our children don't know our traditions. We never took gold. We have no interest in oil. We only cared for the land, and that is all we know. We ask ourselves every day, what did we do so wrong?"
You interviewed him to produce this. So a couple of things from it, Danielle. Losing our languages, you already mentioned that. Lakota is not on the edge of extinction, but it's not doing very well. And I know there are programs both on the reservation and off to try to regenerate the language. How well is that going?
I would say, I can't speak on behalf of all tribes, but my tribe specifically, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, we have a language nest program that started with a friend of mine who was one of the teachers of that. And the very first cohort of 6-year-olds is where it starts. It's the families it's a commitment from the whole family, not just dropping your child off at a school where that's where they speak and then they go home and speak English. It's literally a commitment, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365. The teachers send home labels and they put everything up. You label your cupboard, you label your fork, your food, the garden, everything is labeled in Lakota. And those children are now in high school, and they are the first fluent Lakota speakers in over 100 years.
So when I go through the reservations of South Dakota or North Dakota, you go into a grocery store and each section has both the English word for frozen food or whatever, and then the Lakota word, which is really a great, simple way to introduce people to a language that's largely been lost. I've heard many Native people say, language is not just language, it's our whole way of seeing, our meaning, the significance, the sacredness of things, our very way of knowing what life is bound up in that language, and when the language disappears, you can't transfer it automatically into English.
No, absolutely. I've been told several times by our elders that if you don't know your language, you can't fully know your culture and who you are. All of our ceremonies and our prayers are done in our languages. We're given our native names in our language, and it's a way for our ancestors to be able to recognize us when we go back to the spirit world. So it's really important that we have our language.
So among other things, you are
Yeah.
a visual artist.
I am.
And here is one of your pieces. Talk about it.
Yeah, so again, this is sort of was inspired by, I'm doing a series of women, and this aesthetic is very much like this. You'll see as we flip through some of the images. But this one's called You Can't Have Our Braids, and it was very much stemmed from the boarding school era. And one of the first things that happened to children when they entered those schools is they immediately cut their hair. And so you'll notice a lot of my paintings and pieces have these very vibrant braids. Sometimes they're kind of have their life or spirit of their own. And it's really much because going back to our hair is very important to us, as in many other cultures. But to Native American people, our hair is sacred. It's almost like having a spirit. If we cut it, it's almost like cutting off a limb or cutting off a part of us. And so we tend to grow our hair long, both boys and girls. And so I wanted to do a piece that sort of honored that as it related to boarding school, kind of retaliating. You can't have our braids. We'll just keep growing them back.
And so at the boarding schools, one of the first things that happened was that the person would be held down and their hair cut off. This was an assimilation policy, but surely it was also meant as a cruel breaking of tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see in many paintings what I think are elk teeth.
Yeah. Elk teeth. I actually had somebody thought they were miniature bombs, and I was like, no. Yeah, they're elk teeth. So elk teeth in a lot of Plains tribes, including my own, we adorned our outfits with elk teeth. And how many ivories are in an elk? Does anybody know? 2. Just 2. So if you had a whole dress adorned with elk ivories, that showed status, you know. And I just love, it's my dream to have a fully elk ivory dress one day. So I tend to put that pattern a lot in my pieces.
So let me get this straight, 2 per elk. So
Yeah.
if you have 30, it's 15 elk.
Yeah.
That's a lot of elk.
Yep.
Interesting. And talk a little bit about the insignia on their faces.
Yes, I get that question a lot. So I get the question of what's up with their braids. Well, actually, somebody asked me if they were intestines one time. I was like, well, I love hearing people's interpretations. It's interesting. So I get a lot of questions about the braids, which we covered, the elk teeth, which are not bombs, and then the face. So I had this series was born from a dream I had. I had a dream where this woman was she was dressed in a traditional elk tooth dress. She was definitely from a different time. I kind of consider maybe it was an ancestor coming to me in a dream. She had this beautiful white hair, and she was following me in my dream. And every time I would turn around to ask her why she was following me, I couldn't see her face. I just saw a blur, but just an eye that was very distinct. And she wasn't speaking to me. It was almost like she was communicating through me, like through us looking at each other. And so that's the one eye. So that's one question I get a lot. And then I have the lines on the face, sort of representative of the journey that Native people face. We have a lot of chaos in our life. We have a lot of trauma. We have a lot of ups. Not so many ups. We have ups. We're pretty resilient. We have a lot of ups. We have a lot of drastic downs. And then we have some steady moments as well. So that's sort of the representation of what that means.
Now this is an image. How big is the original?
48 by 48.
And where is it?
New Mexico. Well, it's currently hanging in a museum, but it's loaned out, yeah, from a collector in New Mexico.
May I go to the next slide?
Yes, please.
Matriarch.
Yes, so again, just, another portrait of a woman, very similar aesthetic. In this one, her mouth is sort of blacked out. I tend to do a lot of pieces where it's being censored or silenced, interesting and ironically enough. But this one's called Matriarch, and I used rawhide as the canvas. It's stretched rawhide with sinew that's holding it out. My younger son he's my hiking buddy, and he is the best stick finder that there ever was. And so every time that we go on hikes, he finds like the most perfect sticks that are straight and just amazing. And so at one point in my garage, we probably had like 12 sticks that were all around the same size. And I asked him like, hey, can I use these sticks? And he's like, well, no, they're my hiking sticks. So I end up paying him like $10 a stick.
Wow.
And so that's an even deal for us. But yeah, so I did a few of these pieces where I did a similar portraiture, and these are in private collections as well. This and another one that's a sister to it.
And is her face painted on hide?
Yeah, yep, it's painted on rawhide.
And this was also a traditional way of stretching hides and so on.
So I love to incorporate traditional materials, but like bring it to a contemporary way through au courant color palettes, and sort of a modern day or contemporary artistic style.
So leaving aside what happened here, a common theme in your work is the silencing. And talk about that. I mean, I would have thought that in the 21st century by now, there would be very little silencing. So please talk about that.
Yeah, you would have thought. But it's still happening today. And it's interestingly enough, I'm the first generation born in my family who fully has the legal rights of everybody else in this country. When my grandmother was born, she wasn't considered an American citizen.
Before 1924?
Yeah. When my dad was born, during his generation, his generation weren't able to legally vote in this country up until the 1970s, where Native people were fully given the legal right to vote. So I say all that to say is that I am a generation where I feel like I have, the fact that I'm sitting here today amongst all of you is something that my dad probably never would have thought he could do, or my grandmother for sure. So, and he once told me, Danielle, if you don't speak up, nobody's going to do it for you. And when he told me that, I was a teenager, and I just was like, okay, Dad. But at that, I pocketed it, and it resonates with me more so ever today than it ever has done before. And so that has really prompted me to do a lot of activism work or artivism work. And so, yeah, it's a common theme, because I think about like how our people have been silenced and how we're continuing to be silenced. And so I kind of portray that a lot in the pieces.
So you talk about your own growing up in North Dakota, in Bismarck. Yeah. And if this is an insensitive question, please just tell me. Was there ever a time when you did not want to identify yourself as a Native woman?
100%.
And talk about that.
Yes. Okay. So has anybody been to North Dakota? It is very not diverse. At least when I was growing up, it wasn't.
We represent the full diversity of the state.
This was literally the diversity.
But that's a start.
Yeah, it was a start. There was at least 2 different populations. Now there's a little bit more diversity. The oil fields and the oil boom sort of brought more people in, but it's not where it should be. I say all that to say is I grew up, my family lived on the reservation, but I lived in Bismarck. I went to school in Bismarck. My parents didn't want me going to school on the reservation for their own reasons. But I oftentimes was like the only Native kid in class. My parents made me wear my 2 long braids. It was very obviously I was Native. My last name is Native American, so I got teased a lot, I got bullied a lot, I got called Medusa for wearing my braids. When I was in middle school, I cut all my hair off, dyed it bleach blonde. If anybody remembers the Drew Barrymore era of the 90s, that's what I was going for. And that, like, I look back at my pictures and I was like, oh my gosh. So, and I would stay out of the sun. I wore makeup shades that were like definitely 3 or 4 shades lighter. I wanted my skin to be lighter. So, and I remember wanting to change my name to Walker. I was like, when I'm older and 18, I'm changing my last name to Walker. So I definitely had a lot of self-identity crisis issues and a lot of shame being Native growing up in North Dakota.
So there's teasing in the school systems. Did you feel that there was a racist element to it?
Yeah, definitely.
And was the school that you were attending sensitive to that and tried to protect you from some of that?
No, it was the 90s. I don't know that teachers were well equipped to deal with that. I do remember my 6th grade teacher. I'll never forget her. Her name was Mrs. Johnson, and she saw something in me that no other teacher or anybody ever came to me and told me, at least. And she told me, Danielle, I see something in you. You're a leader, and I want you always to remember that. And I've never forgotten that, and makes me emotional thinking about it.
Do you stay in touch with her?
No, she passed. But yeah,
what a difference though she made.
She sure did, and I'll never forget her, never forget that moment. I can still see the classroom and her pulling me aside thinking I was in trouble. Because I was rebelling. We had to do a project about careers, and everybody had to pick a career out of a hat, and I got garbage man. And I was protesting this. I'm like, I'm never gonna be a garbage man. I wanted to be an actress or an attorney. I wanted to be something else. And I was so devastated by that, and so she pulled me aside and told me that. So anyway.
So I want to raise this question, and it's really a dark question, but I see all over the country now billboards about missing Indigenous women.
Yeah.
And it's an epidemic, and most of us are sort of vaguely aware of that. Talk about this crisis.
Absolutely. I want to also just clarify, epidemic is the wrong term, because that's something that's organically made. This is not something that's organically made.
What term would you use?
Crisis. It's a crisis. And I do want to say that there are several powerhouse women that are working in this state to create change in that realm. 2 of them are in our audience that sit on the Colorado, yes, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Task Force. We have a task force, and this group of women have led the charge to create legislation in this state to address it. And it's not only happening here, it's happening nationwide, globally in many indigenous communities. It is a big, big crisis that's occurring at higher rates than any other population. And we found, because when I say we, I'm part of the task force as well, we collect data and we find that it's not even just women now. Hence why we say MMIR, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. Men are having this issue just almost as equal as women, and two-spirited people.
And just one more question about that. So is the predation because of the perceived vulnerability of indigenous people?
I think it's a culmination of a lot of things. It has a lot to do with like cultural aspects, but also jurisdictional issues that we face when it comes to reservations, a lot of trafficking, and definitely there's a lot of vulnerability that people are pinpointing Native people.
And as you know, Senator Heitkamp of North Dakota was a national leader in this regard too, and so things are beginning to change a little bit.
Yeah.
This is from your book too, I'll read this one. The ecosystem of land, water, plants, and animals, as well as the sky, thunder, lightning, rain, wind, and fire, are all believed to be individual and powerful spirit beings that walk alongside all of us. There is no distinct difference between the physical and spiritual worlds. So when I read this a few months ago, I thought, you Native people, well, let's say Lakota here,
Sure.
look at the world in a fundamentally different way from Anglos, because I don't think any Anglo in the 19th century would write something like this. So talk a little bit about different ways of being, different ways of seeing, different ways of knowing.
Yeah. We're definitely a spiritual people. When I say we, I always want to reference and make sure it's clear. I speak on behalf of what I've been taught in my tribe. My people, again, Native people have many different belief systems, very parallel in a lot of ways. But we are all about the circle. Circle is a very symbolic thing in our culture, and we also, so everything that has a spirit, everything is a circle. The Mother Earth, Húŋkpapː, Grandmother Earth provides everything for us. And so we have to honor that. And so, we as humans walking on this spiritual journey we are sophisticated more than our bird relatives, our fish relatives, our plant relatives. And so we have a voice that we can use. And so it's our responsibility to speak up for our relatives that don't have the voice to speak up for themselves. And so it is important that we speak on behalf of our water and on behalf of our winged relatives and our plant relatives, and treat our Mother Earth in the same respect that she gives to us by giving us life. And so it's very much centric to our spirituality. We don't have a religion, we aren't religious, we are spiritual people, and our ceremonies are very much always centered around the Great Spirit and our Mother Earth.
If this is your philosophy or your mission, that's a heavy responsibility because, for example, if an Anglo culture wants to create a strip mine, it just goes out and creates a strip mine. If it wants to dam a river, it just does it because it has an extractive and transactional idea about nature, which goes all the way back, say, to the book of Genesis, but particularly to the 17th century. This is going to, if natives are at the table, this is going to create some interesting complications.
Yeah, or, just a dialogue and a different narrative.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, on the drive here, I saw the mountain being carved into, and it just breaks my heart when I see things like that. Because I wonder, do people realize what they're displacing when they're extracting? They're displacing the insects and the ecosystems, and I'm not sure how much thought is given to that. So yeah.
And we'll come back to this when we talk a little bit about the DAPL pipeline crisis in North Dakota, but all around Indian country in America, you see the sign, water is life. Water is life. That comes straight out of this, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, every single one of us was born from water. We were all in our mother's womb, which is water. So we come from water, and we need water to survive. So it is our lifeline.
I'll come back to this. This is a beautiful photograph. Tell us what we're looking at.
So this is I mentioned the Red Road Project, which is a photo film documentary series I've been working on for a decade with my best friend, who lives currently in London. And we've been traveling around documenting Native American people. We got the start by focusing on women, and this was part of that. In 2013, we road tripped around Native country, Indian country, and we met with several women, including Sage, who you see here. She's Húŋkpapě. Húŋkpapě is people that they're from the Grand Canyon, and their sacred land is at the base of the Grand Canyon. So whenever we do photographs of people, which you'll see throughout the program, you'll see different photos. Every photograph is not curated. It is us asking the person where, or telling them, wear what you want to wear, present yourself in whatever way you want to be presented, and pick a spot where you want to be photographed that's meaningful to you. We don't curate, or there's a lot of photographers, you're very familiar with one, that did a lot of curation of photos of Native people. And so we're trying to change that narrative by not doing that. We want Native people to represent themselves how they want to be represented. And so Sage wanted to wear her traditional outfit, and she wanted to be photographed at the base of the Grand Canyon, where her people are from and where it's sacred to their people.
It's an extraordinary photograph.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Again, a large piece of your art.
Yeah, so I'm also a muralist. And I love to do a lot of mural. I love color. Maybe you'll notice, or have noticed. I love color. This one was a private commission I did downtown Denver more recently, where I wanted it to be centered on nature and kind of reminiscing of Colorado.
And so, of course, we see the mountains and the sun and the sky and the eagle. And what appears to me to be sort of a pixelization there. What's that about? I just am kind of obsessed with pixels lately, and it kind of goes hand in hand with some of the portrait series you'll see, where there's sort of like a sensor pixels over the mouth. So it's kind of, when I was thinking about this piece, and I didn't pitch it to the client then, but they asked about it, and I just thought, it's sort of an ode and an honor, or how our the bald eagle, sacred, very sacred winged relative, has been going extinct, and there's not very many. And I mean, how many of us, when you see a bald eagle, you're like, oh my gosh, and every life stops, and you're like, look, it's for a reason. There's not that many left. So. And again?
Yeah. So this one's at CU Boulder. I was
engineering building.
At the engineering building. So the students at CU Boulder, the engineering students, approached me. They said, we love your art. We've seen your murals. We'd love and be honored if you would come in and paint a mural at our school. I did, and I did two actually in the building. They have a lot of Native American students in the engineering program, because we're very much a STEM type of people. Science, math, we're star people, so that's why I put a star in here. We look at the stars, we do a lot of calculations in math. Even the way we position our teepees are very much mathematical. So we have a lot of science and math behind a lot of the things that we do, and it's all guided by the stars. And so I wanted to incorporate a star, but also I realized that their mascot is the buffalo, so I was like, well, I can't not do a buffalo in the school that represents the buffalo how I see the buffalo, which is a whole other topic about me wanting to get rid of that buffalo as their mascot, because it's just not right to have our sacred relative paraded around at games. That's so traumatizing for that animal.
So I see the star, and of course the star quilt is a very important part of Native tradition.
Yeah.
And so you're incorporating a bit of that here.
Yeah. Yep.
And how about symbols. The lovely red cuffs?
Yeah, I love to just incorporate traditional symbolism and colors. The buffalo is our relatives. Our creation story starts with buffalo, and so we treat them as our relatives. For the Plains people, specifically my tribe, the buffalo provided everything for us: shelter, food, clothing, tools, everything. And so it's a very sacred animal for us.
I don't know how many of you saw Ken Burns' recent documentary on buffalo. Marvelous piece of work.
Yeah.
And we're reminded then that at one time there may have been 60 million buffalo in the West, all the way from the Appalachians to the Sierra Nevada. By the time that George Bird Grinnell and others attempted to rescue the buffalo from extinction, there were about 550 left on Earth.
Yeah.
And from that small remnant, there has been a recovery until now. There are about 500,000 bison in the United States, and most reservations have a herd. And the glory of that is that they're not confined very well. There's a lot of space to move around.
Yeah, that's very true. And actually, the Genesee herd here in Denver has a DNA from those last 500 buffalo that were left. And so it's really cool that we get to have those here. Also, did you know that buffalo are classified as livestock and not wildlife? Isn't that interesting? Also something to work on, to change. Anyway. So this is another mural. As you can see, I love doing murals. I love doing colorful murals. I love it to be centered on nature and my culture. And so this one's at the Denver Zoo. They asked me to, they had some temporary walls that they were putting up around the zoo as they were doing some renovations, and they asked me if I would come in and decorate the wall, and I did, and it's been up for a few years now. Again, it's really just kind of demonstrating the relationship that we have with our buffalo relatives, and I had to throw a little Peace Pizza in there. Peace Pizza is prairie dog in my language.
Peace Pizza?
Peace Pizza.
That's a pretty tight connection between the two.
They're my favorite.
They are.
I love them so much. So yeah, and then I just did some traditional like Dakota floral work, and really wanted it to be fun and vibrant.
And more braids.
Yeah.
That's lovely. How big is that?
It's about 20 feet long by maybe 10 feet tall.
We can go see that where?
Denver Zoo.
There you are.
Yeah.
All right, here's another one. Please read it.
Today, we see a strong battle over control of native land, particularly sacred sites, between corporations, government, and native peoples. American Indians are lucky if their sacred spaces are located within the reservation boundaries. But if they're not, tribes have a challenging time gaining access and protecting them. Today, most sacred sites being fought for are not located on federal reservation land and are, therefore, not protected.
So just a couple of things. So reservations were kind of a makeshift policy in the mid-19th century, regarded as a temporary holding zone that wouldn't last that long. Natives were almost never consulted about where they wanted their reservations to be.
Yeah.
And so their world, their sacred places, their hunting grounds and so on are often off reservation.
Yep.
And during the DAPL pipeline controversy in North Dakota, one of the questions was, who gets to decide what's sacred? Because within the reservation, the Lakota have a pretty good chance to make their own determinations.
Yeah.
But outside of it, it was non-natives mostly who were saying, well, that's not sacred. We've looked at it, it's not sacred. But these were white people determining what is sacred to a native people without really asking them either. So that you were part of all of that, and that had to be a very upsetting thing about who gets to decide.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you guys familiar with the No DAPL movement, with the Dakota Access Pipeline that happened in North Dakota?
2016-17.
Yep, for 2 years. So my family was intimately connected during that time, and I'm from there. So it was just really heartbreaking to see all of that play out and be there and experience it. They put the pipeline right just north of the boundary.
Half a mile north of
the
boundary.
Just right before the reservation. And said, well, it's not on the reservation, so, but they don't understand that the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868 is still active, and that is treaty land, and so therefore we did have a right to say, no, this shouldn't be here. And what's interestingly enough is that they had originally planned to put the pipeline north of the capital city, Bismarck. Then they said, no, well, what if it leaks? It might affect our people's water. So then they put it south of the Capitol building, right north of our reservation. And it's already leaked.
And so this was an international incident and controversy, and many people feel that it was a setback for white Indian relations in North Dakota, but for Native peoples it was a great gathering. The 7 fires of the Lakota were there for the first time in years.
First time in generations, and it brought thousands and thousands of people. It was an amazing time for that situation where we gathered and really with tribes that were historically enemies were coming together to support each other, and that is a big deal. Because there's not very many of us left. According to the 2020 census, we make up less than 2% of the entire American population. We are growing though, it used to be 1%, so 1% up. So we are growing, which is great, but it was a really great time.
Natives are 6% of the population of North Dakota and the fastest growing population in North Dakota. So that's good. That's what we call Indian country.
Yeah, Indian country.
And it's growing. South Dakota has an even larger native population, of course, Arizona, Montana, the West.
Absolutely.
So back to this pipeline just for a moment. So North Dakota, as you all know, has a gigantic amount of oil.
Yeah.
It has to go somewhere because we can't consume it in state. So you either take it out on trains or on trucks or by pipelines. And pipelines, generally speaking, are regarded as the safest way to get it in and out of a place. When it was going to be sited just above Bismarck on the Missouri River, there was concern that if it leaked, it would damage the water supply of North Dakota's capital city. Okay, but then it was placed 1/2 of 1 mile from the reservation boundary. What could be more cynical than that?
I know, yeah.
And that's what led to the crisis.
Well, yeah, that and a culmination of just not consulting with tribes. I mean, we are a sovereign people, and because they placed it 1/2 mile north of the boundary, they felt like they didn't have to consult with tribes.
Because they regarded that as white land.
Right.
So you said to me before that your family did not, they lived there, near there, but
Yeah.
they did not participate.
Yeah, so my cousin was he was the chairman, it's kind of right-hand man. He was on the tribal council during that time. And so, I would go to the camp every day, and there was lots of fires and lots of activity going on, and I would go there, and then I'd go home at night to stay at my aunt's house. And I would get there, and they would jokingly be like, "You smell like protest," and just no, because I smelled like campfire. It struck a conversation that evening. I was like, "Why don't you guys ever go to the camp?" And they're like, "We don't need to go. We've been fighting for stuff like this our whole lives." And Danielle, what you don't understand is that we live here, and we're gonna be here. All those people coming in from all over the place, they get to come here, do their thing, be here, and then they get to leave. We have to still be here and deal with the aftermath. And so I was like, wow, that's powerful, but I'm still gonna go.
So when your family said you smell like protest, you were saying that natives have a wonderfully rich sense of humor.
Yeah, we do. We couldn't have survived all this time without laughing about our atrocities. It's just what we do. We have to do it.
Land hostage, here we are, yes.
So another piece I did, I don't do a lot of males in my series. I tend to focus a lot on women. Women are really charging the way and making change amongst our people today. But I found I get inspired by photographs. I love looking at old photographs of my ancestors, of other Native people in different tribes, and I came across one that was a prisoner. And I just remember staring at this image for a long time, and I hung it up in my studio, and I just kept looking at it, and I felt compelled to paint it in kind of in my own way. And what's interesting about it is that the braids, and it's probably difficult to see here, but they're actually government checks, federal government checks that I get every so often. I have land that I inherited from my dad on the reservation. I get paid $6.24 or $4.53, every once in a while for ranchers that graze. They lease the land. And it's really a slap in my face that I have no say on that, but also what they pay to do that. So I never cash the checks. I just stack them. I have a whole stack of them. And I tend to embed them in a lot of my pieces. This one is more obvious than a lot of them. I just kind of embed them in the background and cut them out in buffalo shapes or something and sort of embed them so you don't really know it's a check because I paint on top of it. But this one I wanted it to be very much more obvious. So the real piece, or the original piece, which is in the History Colorado Museum right now, they actually acquired it for their collection. When you stand, you can notice that it's federal government checks. And I really wanted this piece to be about, reservations and the land, and how, even though Native people have the land, it's still being controlled by the federal government. So we are still a hostage to the government in terms of our land. So that's what this is about.
So I just want to ask you this question because it's just come up. So the American Indian movement in 1973 occupied Wounded Knee for 70-some days. There was a siege there. The FBI came in there. Several people were killed. And one of the people who went to prison was Leonard Peltier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's been in prison now for 40 years.
Yeah.
Every time a president leaves office, there's a move to have him pardoned. He's now up for pardon.
Yep.
Should that be done?
It should be done, yeah. I have another piece where Leonard and I have written back and forth to each other, and I have some of his letters that I've embedded as braids as well in another piece that's about prisoners, Native American prisoners that are in our system. We have one of the highest rates, highest population of, despite us being the lowest population amongst the whole U.S., we have the highest population percentage in prison systems, which kind of speaks volumes in itself. So yeah, Leonard, sadly, there's a lot of witnesses, and you can do your own research on this and believe what you want to believe, but a lot of eyewitnesses that stated he was
set up. some of the evidence was cooked. I mean,
Yeah.
he may have been complicit in some of what happened, but
Yeah.
what he was convicted of is probably very problematic.
It is, yeah. He was convicted of killing 2 FBI agents at the siege of Wounded Knee.
And there's a lot of bitterness both in Indian country and in the FBI about
Yeah.
that. One reason why the pardon never comes.
I was in Germany a few years ago, and I was sitting at a bar having a drink, and this guy next to me was like, hey, I hear you speaking. Are you American? I was like, well, obviously. And so we got to chatting, and he was like, well, I'm an FBI agent. I was like, whatever, let me see your badge. And he's like, and I was like, well, I had a few glasses of wine at that. I was like, let's talk about Leonard Peltier. And he's like,
How'd he take it?
he didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I'll bet he didn't.
Any opportunity I have, I will talk to
But
whoever.
you do correspond with Leonard.
I do, yeah. Well, I haven't in a few years, but I have, yeah.
That's
He's getting
wonderful.
quite old.
Yeah, he's very elderly now. So this is what we were saying about crime and punishment. What's even more interesting is that according to the Bureau of Native Justice, Native Americans are incarcerated at a rate 38% higher than the United States national average. Okay, but then your best line comes later here. This gives a clear picture showing that while police are slow at protecting Native American people, they aren't so slow at prosecuting them.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's good writing.
Thank you. For a non-writer, I don't write. I hate writing.
But talk a little bit about jurisdictional issues. So this is one of the most vexed questions because natives are sovereign
Yeah.
up to a point,
Right.
but they're also subject to certain federal laws. Then states and native tribes have a very complicated, intense set of jurisdictional issues. Crime occurs on the reservation by a non-native or a native
Or
commits
certain
a
type
crime
of
off reservation. It's very complex.
Very complex, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. I'm like, man, it's not that complicated. We are sovereign people. We have our own police force. We are educated enough to be able to manage and handle our own situations. But to give an example, so like I mentioned, we have our own police force a lot on our own reservations. But if a crime, and they mostly respond to like domestic issues or things like that. But if somebody goes missing or a murder happens on the reservation, they have to call in the FBI. They're not allowed to investigate it on their own. And they're not allowed to call the state police or the local police outside of the reservation. They have to wait for the FBI. This causes a huge issue because we all know the first 48 hours of a crime is crucial to finding evidence and to getting on top of it quickly. Which is one reason why we have such a crisis with missing and murdered Indigenous people, is because a lot of the times the FBI are not going to be responsive right away, especially in places on a reservation where they're not, who knows where they're located. And so it's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's very complicated because of all those jurisdictional issues.
And in addition to that, the U.S. attorney for that state has enormous power about what to prosecute and what not.
Yeah.
And many U.S. attorneys are not interested in Native Americans. When they are, it really makes a difference.
It's very much not the priority.
This is a lovely photograph. Where was it taken?
Changing topics. This is not a prisoner. This is a lovely teenager. Her name is Húŋkpapě, and this is again part of the Red Road Project, photographing Native people as we exist today. Okay, this is a teenager in her bedroom on the reservation, and she wanted to be photographed in her bedroom because that's where she likes to hang out. And so what I love about this image is that it just shows, and I love showing this when I do school talks in high schools or middle schools. I show like, this is what Native kids look like. This is what they're just like you. And so, yeah, just a fun photo from the project.
I'm just going to move ahead because we're going to run out of time here, but I want to go to this one. Please read it. It's so interesting.
Sure. Native American people are in a very unique position in the world, considering their history since pre-colonization until now in present day, with several attempts at cultural genocide through assimilation, forced relocation, language loss, stolen land, the reservation system, and overall identity loss. Native Americans today talk about the concept of living in two worlds. Some describe it like walking through life with a moccasin on one foot and a Nike shoe on the other.
And here's a photograph to illustrate that.
Yes, so again, Red Road Project photo. I saw these two guys. On the left is Fast Eddie. He's called that because of how fast he dances when he does the chicken dance at powwows. And then on the right is Two Braids. He's, at the time, this was taken I think in 2016 or 17. This was at the Gathering of Nations powwow in Albuquerque. And I just saw those two chatting together against a really cool, this blank wall, and I was like, wow, they really stand out. The contrast against this wall. I was like, I want to see if they'll be willing to take their photos. And they were, and I just thought, this is such a great visual of like Native people today, how we walk in two worlds, how we love our regalia, we love our beaded medallions, our quill work, our big earrings, But we also, wear a baseball cap of our favorite team, or wear our favorite pair of jeans. And so it's really a great visual to that.
And what's the man's name on the right?
2 braids.
And so he has this medallion, I'll call it,
Yep.
and it's sort of based on Black Elk, the Lakota's view of the Red Road and the Black Road and the Four Quarters and so on.
Yeah.
It's a lovely image.
Thanks.
So let's go back here to this. So we'll just take a couple of minutes with this, Danielle.
Sure.
So, okay, assimilation, forced assimilation. We're talking about the schools and so on. Genocide, at least cultural genocide.
Yeah.
At times flirting with genocide. Do you believe that there's still the sort of the non-official, but the sort of the American non-native view is still assimilation? Get on board, join us.
I mean, definitely. There's a reason why the federal government gives us numbers. Did you guys know this? So Hitler loved what the American government was doing to the native people and decided to mirror a lot of what he did during World War II to Jewish people, including numbers. So I have a number I'm given to at birth. A lot of enrolled other Native Americans, I'm sure all the other natives in this room have numbers. There's no other race in this country that's given a number based on blood quantum. The only thing I can think of is horses and dogs are given numbers based on their bread, like how much, full bred they are. And so it's very much a way for the government to track us and to watch us assimilate and die out. Because after let's say I intermarry with a non-native person, we have children, our children are now diluted, and it could get to the point where they no longer can get a number and be considered native anymore. I don't know any other race that has that.
Which makes it difficult to get Indian health services and other services on and off the reservation.
Right.
So, yes, and Hitler did definitely say that he took some of his, he learned some things from the reservation system and the way the United States treated native peoples. Genocide is such a strong term.
Yeah.
Do you think there is still genocidal dynamism in American life?
I would say cultural genocide. I mean, it's really, the fact that we're not even acknowledging what happened to Native people. We're not supporting. We're still facing keeping our culture alive in many ways.
So I've written a book sort of that pays some attention to this, and so I'm a white North Dakotan, and there are 760,000 North Dakotans.
Yeah. About
30,000 natives, and I would say that the average white North Dakotan's attitude is, get over it already.
Yeah.
Get over it already. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely.
Well, that makes it almost impossible to have this dialogue.
It is, and I am biracial. I have a white mother and a native father, so I am half and half, and I have to struggle with that within my own family. My white side is very much, our dinner table conversations are very interesting and can get heated at times, especially during the No DAPL movement. I had one side of my family that was very much pro the pipeline and very much another side obviously struggling with this pipeline issue. So I live in these two worlds, literally, and struggle.
Talk a little bit about the struggle.
Yeah, I just did, I guess. I don't know.
But do you feel, many natives who go off into cities when they go back to their reservation feel that they're no longer really welcomed. And
yeah, it's even funny. Like when I go back home to the reservation, a lot of my cousins who never have left the reservation, they don't barely even leave to go to like Bismarck, the capital, or Mandan. They just stay. They don't have a way, and so I go back and they're like, "Oh, look at you, the city Indian." He's too good for us now, and they
is that teasing or do they mean it?
I mean, it's teasing, but I feel like they definitely are meaning it in some ways, and it stemmed from I think jealousy or maybe wishing they had opportunities, which I try to tell them, you have an opportunity, you can leave too, you can get an education, you have all the opportunity that you can, and I'm here to help you too. We're family, so yeah, it's a struggle.
And this will be my last question, and we're going to go to Q&A here, and so be thinking of your questions, and I wish we had 2 more hours because this is so very, very, don't you think this is an amazing conversation? So, some native people that I've known who've gone off to get doctor's degrees and JDs and so on, say that back home on the Standing Rock or Pine Ridge, the people there say, you need to come back. We need you here. Why are you living in Rapid City? Why are you living in Denver? Why are you living in Albuquerque? We need you here.
Yeah.
Do you feel that tug?
I do. I struggle with it. I was told the exact same thing. You know, my father, I'm the only child of my parents, and so my dad was very much wanting me to have a different life than he had. He only had an 8th grade education. My mom never graduated high school, so I was the first to graduate high school, first to go to college, really the first to have all the things like that, and to really create and have a different life than my parents did. And but he very much instilled with me, hence why he wanted me to go to school off the reservation. He said, I need to get an education, and once I do, I need to go back to the reservation and help my people. And I want to, and I do. I think I do in my own ways. I help people here in Colorado. A lot of people don't realize 70% of Native American people live in urban areas, thanks to the Relocation Act, another attempt at cultural genocide and
1950s.
assimilation, which Denver was the capital or the headquarters of that program. But yeah, so I do help my people. I just will never live in North Dakota again as a Native woman and raise children there.
And that's about North Dakota.
Yes.
Sorry to hear it. But North Dakota is definitely locked into kind of a late bigotry, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just as we close this portion of the program, talk about this. This is a very large piece of art, I think, in Amsterdam.
Yes, it's in Amsterdam at the Straat Museum. So Straat is the Dutch word for street. So it's a street art museum, all centered on street art. So they invite street artists from all over the world to come create a giant mural and to put in their permanent collection. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go last year and create a really fun piece and represent Native people. They hadn't had any Native American street artists come there. And so I love pop art. I love the 1950s. My grandparents grew up in the 50s, and I just I love listening to elders. I could listen to elders all day. And I love hearing about these past generations, especially the 50s. And one thing, fun fact, my grandmother told me that she dated Elvis in the 50s.
No.
I was
she
like,
dated Elvis.
What? I mean, I don't know if dated, but like definitely had something with Elvis. And I found this out, and I was just like beyond myself. Anyway, I love the 50s. I love that era. And I love the fun pop art. So I wanted to do something that was like 50s-esque, but like what a Native person could have looked like during that time. So she's hula hooping, but has her moccasins on and sort of dancing. So it's just a fun juxtaposition of like that pop 50s style, but like with still keeping my culture intact.
So we need kind of a companion piece of Elvis.
I know.
Wow. So I wish we could do more of this. We will look at some more. I'm going to go back to that this great photograph. James, if you raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Yesenia Silva Estrada. I'm an immigrant Latina who has grown up in the Roaring Fork Valley, which is very close to here. Your story touched me in many ways. I'm a mestiza, which is a mix of indigenous and white European, except I was born in Mexico and brought over here. And I see a lot of similarities with our Latino community, which here in Vail, we don't have much diversity. It's either Latino or not Latino. How do you see the similarities in your story with our Latino heritage? And my second question is, are there efforts from our indigenous communities in America and in Mexico? Because this used to be Mexican territory.
Yeah.
And a lot of displacement of my own family and Raramuri, who now live in the foothills of the Copper Canyon. And I did not know about that history until I was older, where your story resonates. But are there efforts that can be combined between American indigenous communities and Mexican communities and Latin American communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, and thanks for being here tonight. There is a lot of similarities. We are all indigenous. One thing I want to point out is that just because there's this invisible line between Texas and Mexico doesn't mean that stops differences. There's Turtle Island. The borders were invented during colonization. So the indigenous people to our south, our relatives to the south in Mexico and South America, were colonized just the same as we were here in the United States. And the same thing with our relatives to the north in Canada, and our First Nations relatives. So those borders are a very colonized concept, and really it doesn't mean anything when it comes to the similarities and parallels. There absolutely is parallels, and I know there's a lot of different work done with indigenous groups that are both Native American identifying as well as Latino groups that are identifying as well. So yeah, it's the same.
One of the things that the Lakota used to say is that the Canadian border is a medicine line because the land is exactly the same on either side,
Yeah.
and yet two very different jurisdictions.
It is, and there's a reason why like Native Americans speak English today, because we were colonized by the British, and there's a reason you speak Spanish. You were colonized by the Spaniards, so it's the same, yeah.
Other questions?
Online questions will come from a microphone in the back, so we'll turn this to Megan.
All right. We'll take an online question, and then we have a couple questions from the cards in the room as well. So from our online audience, one of our attendees says, I truly applaud your passion and commitment to such important causes for Native Americans. Earlier you discussed, and even your t-shirt references, about wanting land back that was stolen. Getting all these properties back certainly is significant to Native Americans. Could you speak about how this will improve the quality of life for Native Americans? Speaking about retribution of land, water, what is it that, and the impact of what you're working so hard to achieve?
I guess I would say if somebody came in and stole you out of your house and then just said, we're taking over, you have to get out, and you're like, but I want that back. That's what it means. It means you want your home back. It wants where you come from back. It's the same. There's a reason why there's no reservations in the metro Denver area, and that all the reservations are on the other side of the mountains, because all of that land was stolen. And I will say there is a group of Native people in the Denver area, people of the sacred land, that are working very, very hard, and they've had a huge win recently. If you Google people of the sacred land, you'll see it come up. They got worldwide attention of these efforts. I don't know how to address that question other than just like flipping it back, saying, what I said about if somebody just kicked you out of your home and told you to leave, and you'd want it back. It's the same.
Hey, from one of the cards, what is your art background, and have you painted all of your life?
Great question. I am self-taught. I have not had any formal training. I did at one point want to go to art school. I got accepted to an art school in England and was set to go, but because of my family dynamics, I wasn't able to afford to go, and so I wasn't able to go to college right away. I had to put myself through college as an adult. But I studied psychology, so a much different path that way. But I have created my entire life. I come from a family of self-taught artists. My dad was the very first artist I ever knew existed. I've always had a pack of crayons with me. I've always created. I've always made up stories and wrote things. So I've always been a creative spirit my entire life.
Quantum issue, and are there efforts going on to change and reverse the policy that currently exists?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, that is I don't even know where you would begin to change that, because then if you took that away, it almost would be like depleting all of Native American existence. Because if we don't have that number, we're not considered Native American in this country. So if we went away with it, does that mean Native Americans don't exist anymore? I don't know. I will say what I personally have done. I'll share what I do. So I have 2 sons, and I refuse to get them enrolled. I refuse to abide by that system. It has detriments and challenges that go along with that. Like, for instance, I was back home on the reservation, and my sons were being ridiculous with their cousins and doing three-wheelers. Three-wheelers should be outlawed. They flipped the three-wheeler. My son broke his wrist on the reservation, and we had to go to IHS, Indian Health Services. And because he's not enrolled, they treated him, but I got a bill for it. So there are some consequences of me not enrolling my children, but I personally just refuse, because I am doing my own protesting against that. I think it's wrong, and I don't want to give my children a number. I feel like when they turn 18, if they want to go to the enrollment office and enroll themselves and get a number, then they can do that on their own, but I don't want to make that choice for them.
If they did do that at 18, they would be enrolled?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our online audience, can you talk about the most effective ways white Anglo folks in the attendance can be allies moving forward?
Well, gosh, where do I start? Like land back, land back. So I would say the fact you're showing up here today to listen to me and share space with me is a huge thing. So thank you. So, you know, if you learn something new today, you talk about it to somebody else and you spread the word, I mean, that's huge. We are only 2% of the entire population in the US. Even if all of us scream at the top of our lungs about what we need help with and what we're struggling with, we're still not loud enough. So we do need allies, whether it's helping in legislative issues or what I always tell people is, what are you good at? Are you an attorney? Are you good at math? What are you good at? Use those skills and offer to help Native people, Native organizations with what your assets and skills are. There's so many organizations and boards that, like I sit on a board, several different boards, and you know, we're like, oh, we wish we had an attorney or somebody that was like savvy in law, or we wish we had somebody that was savvy in finance. So that's a good way to be an ally, or you know, supporting Native American people, organizations supporting Native artists. Doing more than just reading a land acknowledgement or listening to it and thinking like, oh, I feel good about that, and then moving on. Take action.
And I forgot to mention the first part of that one was that they said that you are one of their biggest role models.
Okay.
I should have added that one in.
And of course, people can read your book, which is a great start if they want to be allies.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
James?
Hi. Thank you for being here and sharing your story. Greatly appreciated. Can you talk a little bit about the connections or parallels or the overlaps with the indigenous struggle and then the Palestinian struggle?
Yeah.
And how you've been caring for that and tending to that in your own work?
I think we were intending that to be after the program, if that's all right.
Well, I will say when Dale got up and talked and said I'd be happy to talk about Israel and Hamas, that I'm not savvy in Hamas. I don't know anything about Hamas. I don't align myself with Hamas. I align myself with the Palestinian indigenous people and understanding their struggles and identifying and paralleling that to Native American struggles. That's what I understand and what I know. I don't know anything about Hamas other than what I see in the news. So I can't speak to that, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of an elephant in the room. You know, I'm happy that I'm here. I was supposed to actually be here creating a mural in Vail Village this week. And you saw some of my murals. They weren't offensive, I hope. But I'm just really grateful that I have the opportunity to come into the community and be able to still have a voice, which was something I wasn't given the opportunity to do. And so I am happy that I get to talk about my art, which was what this was supposed to be about. And but I did create one piece that got very controversial, and that piece was very much aligned with parallels that I personally see and experience, and many other Native Americans see and experience with what's going on, not only just with Palestinian people, that just happens to be current events, but also with many other groups and individuals and populations around the world that have had struggles with genocide.
Thank you. So, and again, we can have that conversation continuing later, but let's try to avoid it for the moment.
From one of the cards, how were you involved with the effort to produce the report by the people of the sacred land? And are there printed copies of the full report available, and where and how?
Okay, so Tom, you've been very abreast in this. Can you answer this question?
Right here, right here.
Hi, I'm Tom. I don't have a lot of detail. I know that Rick Williams and, man, there was at least 8 legal researchers and 3 copy editors, and they've been working for years.
But you saw the report, didn't you?
I've seen the PDF. Okay. Felicia Bartley at History Colorado actually got her hands on a physical, but I don't know.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm not sure if it's been published officially.
What is it? Tell us what it is.
So, you probably read it a little bit more than me. Do you want to just give a Cliff's Notes?
I mean, I've gotten through about, 700 pages?
Yeah.
So I've gotten through about the first 100 or so, and it's basically, what they've done is they've gone through all of the legal treaties that Native peoples signed with essentially an invasion of white people into Colorado.
In Colorado
territory.
specific, yeah.
And basically, the conclusion is, TLDR, white folks are really good at writing treaties but not following them. And so, and they actually list out all of the precedents and have listed out all of the lands that now fall outside of legal, that were extra legally acquired.
Right.
And it comes out to, I think in today's dollars, $1.7 trillion.
tons and tons.
Yeah.
I know when I bought I live in Central Park, Denver, if anybody knows where that is, but I bought a house there recently, or a year ago, and when I was going through the paperwork, I saw a document from the Dawes Act that my land parcel was given to a settler through the Dawes Act, and I actually have that document. And I'm sure if I have that, several other people have that. It basically stated this was native land and that they're giving these parcels out to white settlers that want to come in and create farms or settle.
Dawes Act dispossessed more than 90 million acres from native peoples. The idea was that natives would be encouraged to homestead, to claim homesteads on their lands. And once they'd had a period to do that, surplus lands would be made available to non-natives. And so more than half of every Indian reservation, almost every Indian reservation in the United States, has been alienated into white hands, even though it looks solid on the map. And so that was the Dawes Act, 1887.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your favorite piece of art that you've done was.
Well, first of all, thank you for being a youth future relative, for being here. Favorite piece of art? Oh my gosh, I feel like every new piece of art that I create is my new favorite one. I would say, I love experimenting and trying new things, and if you ever get to go to the History Colorado Museum and see my current show, which is on through September 15th, there's a piece of, I always wanted to work with neon. I love neon lights, and so I wanted to fabricate a really cool neon piece, and I did a bunch of elk teeth. The elk teeth are probably like this big. It's a 6-foot piece of neon, and it says, "This is native art," with a bunch of elk teeth on it. And it's a very simple piece of art, but it was born from the inspiration of, I get a lot of questions, as you've seen through some of my art, like this one up here, is I get people that look at it sideways and they kind of stir and they don't understand it, and they're like, "Do you consider your art native art?" And I've had that question more than once, which is why I created that neon piece that says, "This is native art." Because I'm like, and I've come to the realization people are not used to seeing native art as it looks like this. I'm Native American, I create art, so therefore it's Native American art. It doesn't always have to be a chief on a horse overlooking a mountain or a piece of pottery. It can be this. And so I think, to answer your question, my favorite piece is a piece that I created out of neon lights.
We don't have it here, unfortunately.
No, we don't. Sorry.
We have time for a few more, and there's a few up here too, James.
Can you talk about Native Americans' impression, generally, of the Crazy Horse Monument near Custer, South Dakota?
Yeah, so you talked about the offensiveness of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
This gigantic, colossal sculpture of crazy horses being carved there. What's your view of that?
So it's all being, it's very much signifying Crazy Horse, which is a chief, a Lakota chief, who's from those lands. And really after Mount Rushmore was put up, Crazy Horse was then put up sort of in place of it, or alongside of it, adjacent, to say, no, this is native land. This is our land. And so it's a privately funded project that's been worked on for, I don't even know, do you know how long?
Many decades.
More than my generation. Before
Right.
my generation, won't be finished in my generation, or maybe even our grandchildren's generation. They aren't accepting any federal funding or anything. It's all privately funded.
And so one question that often gets raised is that an appropriate way to honor indigenous resistance? Because and some people say Crazy Horse would never have wanted that.
Yeah, I mean, I see both sides to it. I feel like when it was starting, whoever made the decision at the time maybe thought it was a great idea. I'm not sure that, Crazy Horse would have thought it was a great idea. I don't know that if I think it's a great idea, but I do love going through the Black Hills, and if I have to see Mount Rushmore or t-shirts with people wearing Mount Rushmore as they're on their holidays, I love to then see Crazy Horse being there too.
Question here, and then there.
I just have just a comment.
Sure.
This exhibit at the Colorado History Museum is wonderful.
Thank
and
you.
That's how we learned of you.
Thank you.
And then I Googled you while I'm in the museum, and then found out
Oh gosh.
everything beyond that, and
Yeah.
your wealth of work. So
I appreciate you.
yeah, no,
Thank
you.
wonderful. So,
Have you seen the movie War Pony?
Yes.
All right. Do you have a negative or positive or mixed opinion of it?
I have a mixed opinion. I feel like sometimes films that come out, while they're really I don't necessarily like poverty porn, and I don't like that being the narrative all the time. We are rich in culture, in resilience, in education, and we aren't just about poverty, alcoholism, and issues. We're definitely more than that. So well, films like that touch me because I relate and I get it, and I'm like, wow, this is real. I also would love to see more films made about the resilience.
One thing that I saw in it was I think the entire cast and crew made Native American.
Yes, and I do appreciate that
In
too.
that sense, that struck me.
Absolutely, yes.
We have time for a few more. Raise your hand high so we can make sure he sees you.
I have a quick question about your friendship with Tommy Orange. I think I read about that online. I read his book a few years ago, and it really moved me. And I was just wondering if you two have ever collaborated on anything, or if he influences your art at all.
I have goosebumps because I love Tommy. I was just with him a couple weeks ago in the Bay Area. So Tommy Orange, if you don't know, is a Native American artist. He's based in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and he wrote a book called They're There, which was a Pulitzer Prize nominated book. And he's recently written a book that he just finished tour called Wandering Stars. And he is a self-taught writer as well, which I really love that about him. And we haven't collaborated, although that would be a freaking dream come true. I do know that, I was on a panel with Tommy Orange and Tasba, who is the executive producer and writer of Res Dogs. Has anybody seen Res Dogs, the film, or the TV show? And they actually are collaborating. She is writing a movie based on his book, They're There. It's going to be coming to TV. So I'm really excited. I don't even know if that's publicly announced, so heard it here first, breaking news. But Tommy Orange is magnificent because he is what we call an urban Indian, born and raised in a city. He writes about Native Americans living in a city and really centered around the Indian Relocation Act and a lot of the activism that took place in urban areas thereafter in the 60s and 70s.
James, what time, do we have time?
We can do, I think, one more.
And then we have a 3-minute video, so I want to make sure there's time for that too. So let's do one more question.
Yeah, do we have? Here goes Seth.
Hello. My question is, you see just south of us, the Mescalero Apache Reservation's on fire, literally tens of thousands of acres. And the native reservation there is actually housing evacuees from the white communities nearby. But all we see in the news is the impact it's had on the white communities. You don't hear anything about the fact that the native lands are being burned to the ground right now. And it's apparently arson targeted towards the community. And I always thought growing up, my family's 3 miles from the reservation, that they were always held in high regard, and that it was a place that has had great strides in working with the community. And then I'm disappointed to see this, the way it's being portrayed. So if that story's not being told, is there anywhere in this country or in North America that is doing a good job of working with the Native Americans and representing them in a positive way?
I hate to generalize anything, but I will say no. Native Americans representation in media is almost non-existent. We see that when it comes to, even with missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. You see a blonde girl going missing in the mountains, and it's all over the news until that case is figured out. But when we have one Native American going missing a week here in Colorado, nobody hears about it. That's our average right now. We have a missing Indigenous persons alert called MIPA. It's an alert similar to like Amber Alert, but it doesn't go out and blare everybody's phone like it does. It goes out to people that sign up to receive these alerts, sort of like a silver alert. And right now on average, and correct me if I'm wrong, task force, but the last I checked, it was about 1 person a week is going missing in this state, Indigenous, and I bet nobody in here knew that. So I say all that to say, in media, we're not represented, but I'm happy to hear that the natives are taking in people. That's just the way our culture is. We always help people.
Danielle, I wish we had more time. Of course, we can linger a little here, but I know you want us to look at this. Tell us what we're about to see as we close.
As part of the Red Road Project, realized photographs are amazing and they really capture a moment, but it was a pivotal moment for me when I was visiting with some elders and listening to their stories in their living room, specifically one in Wind River in Wyoming. And I found out he had passed away a few years ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have recorded his stories, because when our elders pass, their knowledge passes with them. And if we don't document that or listen or pass it on, it's gone forever. So we started, me and my collaborator on this project started documenting on film our elders. And so this is a video that we put together because we realized every time we would talk to elders all over the country, they had the similar theme about caring for our Mother Earth. And so we put together a 10-minute video, which can be found, the full one can be found on redroadproject.com. But I just wanted to show a very small snippet of it and just sort of leave everyone with something to think about on our Earth.
So 3 minutes of a 10-minute video
Yeah.
that people can find online.
Yeah.
Affected with NDD. And NDD is a legitimate mental disorder. It's nature deficit disorder. And when you're not communing with the natural elements that surround you, even the green gives me energy, it cuts you off. Our society is so absent of the sacred. It's almost as though it's just but money that's sacred, irregardless of what the consequence may be. That's not a way to live at all. When you can communicate with everything that does surround you and you have that reciprocity, if you take something, you give something.
And the reason why I think we've been here so long was a simple thing, and that was respect. They tell about how when we take things, life of animal, plant life, things using for our homes or cradle boards, willows, those kind of stuff. Anytime we take something, we always pray for it. We always give something back to it. We don't have anything, maybe a piece of our hair we give back. People they're afraid of each other. Like in a classroom now, we have 3 schools that have our language. And the kids are grasping it, but they're getting closer with natives. They come together, they know about each other's. They're respecting each other's cultures. That's what's happening now. I mean, you hear news, oh man, it's getting terrible out there. But I think respect is the only thing they have to know. Because that's why we live here so long.
My mother believed when ceremonies, singing, and dancing stops, so does the earth. We have to keep her mother alive. Learn the songs, learn the ceremonies, participate in dances, learn your musical instruments, like the toppers do.
Ladies and gentlemen, Danielle SeeWalker.